The Resident Evil movies made over $1 billion at the box office, and somehow every single one of them is broken. From a protagonist who becomes an unkillable god by film 2, to iconic game characters getting killed off-screen between sequels, to plot twists that literally erase the movie you just watched. Today I'm breaking down everything wrong with this franchise, starting with the one decision that ruined all 6 films, the Alice supremacy. Here's the thing about the Resident Evil movies. They had Jill Valentine, they had Leon Kennedy, they had Chris Redfield, characters who earned their survival through resource scarcity and barely scraping by with 3 bullets and a dream. And the films looked at all of that and said, nah, let's make up a new girl. Alice is not from the games. She was created specifically for the movies, which immediately put the franchise at odds with its source material. But that's not even the problem. The problem is what she became. In the first film, she's an amnesiac security operative. Fine, workable. By the second film, she has telekinetic powers. Zero buildup. By the fourth film, she's commanding an army of clones of herself, storming Umbrella's Tokyo headquarters like a one-woman apocalypse. And by the sixth film, she's retroactively revealed to be a clone herself, because at that point, why not? And here's where it gets damning. The filmmakers clearly knew her invulnerability was a problem, because they kept trying to remove her powers. In Afterlife, Wesker injects her with a serum that neutralizes the T-virus. She literally thanks him, says it feels good to be human again. Great, tension restored. Except within minutes, the powers come back through some contrived nonsense. This happens multiple times across the franchise. They take her powers away, pretend it matters, then hand them right back. It's like watching someone put a band-aid on a gunshot wound and then rip it off because they got bored. But the worst part isn't what Alice became. It's what she did to everyone else. Every game character gets systematically reduced to a background extra. Jill Valentine becomes secondary. Leon accomplishes basically nothing. Chris Redfield exists to stand behind Alice and look concerned. These are characters who carry entire games on their backs, and in the movies, they can't even carry a subplot. Alice didn't just fail as a character. She was a black hole at the center of this franchise. Everything orbited her, and anything that got too close got consumed. But if you think one overpowered protagonist is bad, wait until you hear what they did to the actual story. Because the retcons in this franchise don't just bend the plot, they snap it in half. The great retcon. The first Resident Evil film has problems, sure, but it also has one genuinely clever twist. Alice was never just a security guard. She was a mole. She'd become disillusioned with Umbrella, teamed up with Lisa Addison to smuggle out evidence of the company's crimes, and the entire third act reframes everything you've watched. Alice had a real history, real relationships, and a real moral awakening that drove her to betray the most powerful corporation on the planet. And then the final chapter came along and said, actually, none of that happened. Here's the thing. The sixth film reveals that Alice is a clone of Alicia Marcus, the daughter of Umbrella co-founder James Marcus. Her consciousness literally began in that shower scene from the opening of the first movie. She didn't lose her memories because of the Red Queen's nerve gas. She lost her memories because she never had any. Dr. Isaacs says it directly. You have no memory because you have no life. Great line if you ignore the fact that it demolishes 5 films of character development in about 4 seconds. Think about what this actually means. If Alice's first moment of existence was waking up on that bathroom floor, then her backstory with Lisa Addison is either implanted memories or complete fiction. Her ethical conversion, her decision to sabotage Umbrella from within, all of it becomes meaningless. She didn't choose to do the right thing, she was manufactured to do it. The Red Queen apparently programmed her with a subconscious mission to stop Umbrella, which transforms Alice from a person with agency into an automaton running pre-installed software. But here's where it gets really frustrating. The film never actually clarifies whether Alice genuinely participated in the events of the first movie or not. Did she really work at the Hive? Did she really know Lisa? The movie just shrugs. It needed the first film's events to have happened for its own plot to make sense, but its central revelation makes those events impossible as originally presented. Nobody involved seemed to notice or care, and the Red Queen knew. Alicia Marcus knew. They both apparently understood Alice was a clone from the very beginning and just decided not to mention it across 5 entire films, for reasons that are never explained. Not vaguely explained, never explained. A good retcon takes something confusing and makes it clearer. This retcon takes something that worked perfectly fine and detonates it. Alice goes from a character who made a brave moral choice to a blank hard drive that booted up with someone else's conscience preloaded, which is, not ideal, but at least Alice got to exist in the story long enough to be retconned. Some characters didn't even get that courtesy. The Vanishing Cast. Let me set the scene for you. It's the end of Retribution. Alice, Jill Valentine, Ada Wong, Leon Kennedy, and a little girl named Becky are all standing at the White House. Humanity's last stand, thousands of zombies closing in. Wesker hands Alice her powers back. The camera pulls out to reveal an army of undead stretching to the horizon, and the screen cuts to black. That's your cliffhanger. That's your promise. The next movie is going to be the battle for the White House, the final war for humanity, featuring every major character the franchise has been building toward for 5 films. The final chapter opens, and every single one of those characters is dead. Not dead in a dramatic sacrifice. Not dead in a heroic last stand you get to witness. Dead off-screen, between films, with zero explanation and zero acknowledgement that they ever existed. The White House battle that was explicitly set up as the centerpiece of the next film, they skipped it. The movie opens with Alice crawling out of rubble alone, and that's it. That's what you get. Here's where it gets genuinely insulting. If you want to know how Jill, Ada, Leon, and Becky actually died, you have to read the novelization, a book. The deaths of franchise-spanning characters based on iconic video game protagonists were deemed so unimportant they couldn't spare 30 seconds of screen time. You need to buy supplementary reading material to understand why the 6th movie starts the way it does. Cool, that's also a thing that happened, but the worst part isn't the off-screen deaths. It's the silence afterward. Alice never mentions any of them, not once. Not a single line acknowledging Jill Valentine, a character who appeared in multiple films. Not a passing reference to Leon. Not a moment of grief for Becky, the child she risked her life to protect in the previous movie. These people simply stop existing. They are not mourned, not referenced, not even used as motivation. These weren't background extras. Jill had a multi-film arc involving mind control and redemption. Leon and Ada were brought in specifically because fans demanded game protagonists get real screen time. They finally got it, and then they were deleted before they could do anything with it. It's the franchise's most cowardly narrative decision. The filmmakers promised an epic conclusion, realized they couldn't deliver it, and instead of finding a creative solution, they pretended it never happened. They took the most anticipated sequence in the entire series and replaced it with nothing. Literally nothing. A time skip and some rubble. But if the Vanishing Cast feels like a betrayal of individual characters, wait until you see what the franchise did to the entire world it built, the global apocalypse. Here's something that should bother you way more than it does. In the games, the Raccoon City outbreak happens in 1998. It's devastating, but governments respond like competent organizations. The military moves in. A nuclear missile wipes the city off the map. International bodies form to deal with bioweapon threats going forward. It's grim, but it's logical. The first Resident Evil film actually respects this. The hive outbreak is bad, Raccoon City gets overrun, and then the nuke drops. Contained. Done. Then extinction happens, and suddenly the entire planet looks like Mars with worse parking. By the third film, the T-virus has somehow caused complete global ecological destruction. Oceans are drying up. Deserts have swallowed entire cities. Characters are wandering the Mojave like it's a Mad Max audition nobody asked for. And the timeline for this? Roughly 3 years. Raccoon City gets nuked in 2002, and by 2005, nearly every human on Earth is either infected or dead. 3 years. From one contained city outbreak to the near total extinction of the human species. For context, that's less time than it takes most people to finish a degree. The games show coordinated global response teams, quarantine protocols, and international bioweapon treaties. The movies show everybody apparently going on lunch break while civilization collapses. But here's the kicker. The final chapter tries to retroactively explain this by revealing that Umbrella's leadership unanimously voted to deliberately release the T-virus worldwide. The reason? Overpopulation. Their brilliant strategy was to wipe out humanity, wait 10 years, then release an airborne antivirus while thawing out cryogenically preserved Umbrella employees to repopulate the Earth, which is, not ideal as a business plan. This revelation is clearly the filmmakers trying to patch a plot hole they created 3 movies earlier. Why did the whole world collapse from one city outbreak? Because Umbrella did it on purpose. Cool. Except the films never established this during the actual apocalypse. We never see Umbrella releasing the virus globally. We never see governments failing to respond. We just jump from one city got nuked to Earth is a barren wasteland with zero connective tissue. The conspiracy explanation doesn't even fully work, because the second film treats the outbreak's spread as accidental, not orchestrated. So either Umbrella's master plan involved looking surprised when their own plan worked, or the writers simply forgot what story they were telling. And nobody in the film seems particularly curious about how this happened. Alice never asks. The survivors never discuss it. An entire species got wiped out in less time than a presidential term, and the characters treat it like weather. Oh, the apocalypse? Yeah, that happened. Anyway, but if the global timeline is a mess, wait until you see what they did to Albert Wesker, because that man's character arc makes even less sense than the end of the world. The Wesker inconsistency. Albert Wesker should have been the best thing about these movies. He has superhuman strength, regenerative healing, a god complex the size of a small continent, and the kind of cold ruthlessness that makes for a genuinely terrifying antagonist. And for about 45 minutes of screen time across 4 films, he actually is. In Afterlife, Wesker does something almost nobody else in this franchise manages. He wins. He strips Alice of her powers, demonstrates superior combat ability, and literally asks her for her last words. That's your endgame villain, the guy who beat the unbeatable protagonist and looked bored doing it, and then he just doesn't kill her. The man who injected himself with a prototype virus to become a living weapon, who has zero moral hesitation about anything, decides that confirming Alice's death after detonating a facility-destroying bomb is apparently optional. He walks away. She survives. Cool, add that to the list. But here's where it gets genuinely stupid. By retribution, Wesker has flipped from ultimate antagonist to reluctant ally. He injects Alice with the T-virus to restore her powers, because he needs her help defending the White House against the Red Queen. The guy who spent an entire film trying to destroy her is now handing her abilities back on a silver platter. The justification for this character reversal is roughly the situation changed, which is, not a motivation. Then the final chapter reveals that Wesker's alliance was itself a trap. The White House defense was a setup, and the last stand he orchestrated was just a scheme to lure Alice in. So let me walk you through this. Wesker defeats Alice and takes her powers, then gives her powers back to fight alongside him. Then it turns out he was planning to betray her the entire time. So his master plan was win, then pretend to lose, then genuinely empower the person he beat with superhuman abilities, then try to kill them again. That's not a scheme. That's a man having a series of small strokes. Here's the thing that really twists the knife. In the games, Wesker is genuinely brilliant. His defeats come from unforeseen circumstances and protagonists who get lucky at exactly the right moment. Game Wesker nearly wins every single time, and when he loses, it feels earned. Film Wesker loses because he forgot to look behind him. Film Wesker loses because he didn't bother checking whether his bomb actually killed the one person he needed dead. Film Wesker's plans fail not because of heroic opposition, but because of catastrophic negligence, which the script frames as arrogance, but which functions identically to a man forgetting his car keys every single morning. He started as the franchise's most credible threat, and ended as a plot device whose allegiance shifts based entirely on what the current film needs him to be. Villain this movie, ally next movie, double agent the movie after that. Not because of character development, because the script required it. But if you think Wesker's identity crisis is bad, wait until you see what they did to the Red Queen, because that AI changes personalities more often than most people change clothes. The Red Queen identity crisis. The Red Queen is the single most contradictory character in the entire franchise, and that's saying something considering what they did to Wesker. Here's the thing. In the first film, the Red Queen is the villain. She seals the hive, floods chambers with halon gas, and activates a laser grid that slices through an entire commando team like deli meat. Multiple people die screaming because this AI decided the best way to handle a viral outbreak was to murder every living person inside the facility. Cool, she's a killer robot. We're all on the same page. Then she disappears for 3 films, not reduced to a background role. Gone. Films 2 through 4, the Red Queen is either completely absent or referenced only as a hostile system that nearly killed everyone. Nobody misses her. Nobody calls her for advice. She's the psychotic computer that murdered their friends. But then, the final chapter happens, and suddenly the Red Queen contacts Alice directly to propose an alliance. She tells Alice that Umbrella's plan to wipe out the remaining human population conflicts with her core programming, and she can no longer stand by. She provides strategic intel, warns about timelines, and essentially becomes the most important ally in the entire film. And here's where it gets completely inexplicable. The final chapter reveals that the Red Queen was built using the template of Alicia Marcus, and that she was always programmed with two directives: follow all Umbrella orders and protect human life, always, from the beginning. Let that sink in for a second. If the Red Queen was always programmed to protect human life, then the laser corridor in the first film cannot have happened. Those were Umbrella employees, humans. The Red Queen activated a defense system specifically designed to cut people into pieces and killed them one by one. You cannot program an AI with a prime directive to preserve humanity and then have that same AI gleefully execute a room full of people with a laser grid. Those two things are mutually exclusive. The White Queen even mentions in an earlier film that the Red Queen's actions were always for the preservation of human life. This is framed as foreshadowing, but it's not foreshadowing if the thing you're foreshadowing directly contradicts every single thing the character did on screen. That's not clever writing. That's hoping nobody remembers the first movie. And the convenience factor is staggering. When the plot needs exposition about Umbrella's secret plans, the Red Queen is suddenly omniscient and chatty. When the plot needs Alice to struggle alone, the Red Queen is mysteriously unavailable. She can warn Alice about a 2-day deadline to save humanity, but she can't open a door. She can reveal decades of Umbrella conspiracy in a single conversation, but she couldn't mention any of this during the previous 15 years of global apocalypse. Her capabilities expand and contract based entirely on what the screenplay needs in that specific scene. The Red Queen isn't a character. She's a narrative cheat code the writers activate when they've written themselves into a corner, which is, not ideal for your franchise's most iconic AI. But if you think a flip-flopping supercomputer is bad for the horror genre, wait until you see what the franchise did to survival horror itself, the action horror conflict. Here's something people forget. The original Resident Evil game didn't just belong to the survival horror genre, it literally invented the term. The back of the box for the 1996 PlayStation release is the first known use of survival horror as a genre classification. That game defined an entire category built on specific rules. You don't have enough ammo, the spaces are too tight, the enemies are too strong, and you are gonna die a lot. The entire point is that you are vulnerable. The films understood this for about 45 minutes of the first movie, and then never again. The first Resident Evil film actually has some survival horror DNA in it. The Hive is claustrophobic. The team gets picked apart. Characters die because they make mistakes, not because the plot needs an action beat. You can squint and see the source material in there. But by Afterlife, every element of survival horror has been surgically removed and replaced with slow-motion action choreography from a completely different franchise. The opening sequence is genuinely the most anti-survival horror thing ever committed to screen. Alice leads an army of clones, hundreds of them, into the Tokyo Umbrella facility. They massacre everyone in minutes. Hundreds of superpowered identical women mowing down soldiers with zero resistance, zero tension. That's not survival horror. That's a power fantasy with zombies in the background. Look at how the environments evolve. The first film gives you the Hive's corridors, tight turns, locked doors. By the third film, you're in the open Mojave Desert. By the fourth, massive underground chambers designed for vehicular sequences. By the fifth, simulated suburban neighborhoods built for gunfights. Every single film pushes the setting further from claustrophobia and closer to large empty space where cool flips can happen. Then there's the creatures. In the games, Nemesis is one of the most terrifying enemies ever designed. He stalks you across multiple areas. You can't kill him easily. The optimal strategy is literally to run away. In Apocalypse, Nemesis shows up and gets defeated through a choreographed fight sequence. Alice doesn't outsmart him. She doesn't barely escape. She beats him in combat. Because by that point, Alice can beat anything in combat, which means nothing is scary anymore. This is the fundamental problem. Horror requires vulnerability. The moment your protagonist can telekinetically crush a room full of enemies, you don't have horror. You have an action movie wearing a horror costume. And the franchise kept escalating Alice's powers while trying to maintain the Resident Evil branding, which is like calling something a stealth game while giving the player a tank. Here's the kicker. When the franchise was rebooted, the entire marketing campaign centered on one promise. This time, it would actually be scary. Tight spaces, genuine dread, boots on the ground terror instead of superhuman spectacle. The filmmakers essentially said we're going back to what Resident Evil is supposed to be, which is a polite way of confirming that 6 films and 15 years of the Anderson franchise had completely abandoned the genre identity of its own source material. When actually being scary is your reboot's selling point, the original franchise has failed at its most basic job. But if you think abandoning the genre was bad, wait until you see what these films did to their own endings. Every single time. The cliffhanger reset. Here's the thing about every single problem we've talked about so far. The bad adaptations, the vanishing characters, the lore contradictions, the villain who forgot how to be scary. All of that could theoretically be forgiven if the films at least respected their own story from one entry to the next. They didn't, not even a little bit. The Resident Evil franchise developed a very specific habit. Each film would end on a massive cliffhanger, some dramatic promise of what was coming next, and then the following film would open by quietly erasing that promise and pretending it never happened. This wasn't a one-time creative pivot. This was the franchise's entire operating system. Let me walk you through the worst example. Retribution ends with Wesker injecting Alice with the T-virus to restore her superhuman powers. This is framed as a huge moment. The music swells. Wesker, the longtime villain, is now an ally. Alice is back at full strength. They're standing at the White House with Jill Valentine, Leon Kennedy, and Ada Wong, preparing for humanity's last stand. Roll credits. See you in the sequel. The final chapter opens, and literally, none of that matters. The White House is destroyed. Alice is the sole survivor. Every character standing beside her at the end of Retribution is dead. The opening monologue just waves its hand and says, "Yeah, that was all a trap by Wesker," as if that resolves anything. It doesn't. It raises about 40 new questions and answers 0 of them. But the real gut punch is the powers. Remember that dramatic injection scene? The one the entire 5th film built toward? The Red Queen casually reveals that Wesker faked it. The T-virus injection that served as the climactic moment of an entire movie was retroactively theater, which means every audience member who watched that scene and felt something was, in the politest possible terms, suckered. And this pattern repeats across the entire franchise. The second film contradicts the first film's timeline. The third film shifts from contained outbreak to global extinction without explanation. The fourth film introduces an army of Alice clones with 0 setup. The 5th film builds an elaborate scenario that the 6th film immediately abandons. Every single sequel opens by invalidating the movie before it. This is not storytelling. This is a franchise that treats its own continuity like a rough draft it can scribble over whenever it wants. The retconning wasn't an occasional tool to fix a plot hole. It was the primary narrative mechanism. Not cause and effect, not character development, not escalating stakes. Erasure. And the worst part? It worked. Not creatively, obviously, but commercially. The franchise made over $1.2 billion at the global box office, which means audiences kept showing up, even after being told repeatedly that nothing they watched in the previous film actually counted. That's either bizarre loyalty or proof that people will sit through anything if you put enough explosions in it. By the time the 6th film rolled around, even dedicated analysts had given up trying to make the timeline work. The most honest assessment anyone could offer was essentially, we don't know why. We don't want to know why. That's not criticism. That's surrender. The franchise had so thoroughly trained its audience to stop caring about narrative investment that the only rational response was resigned bafflement. And that, ultimately, is the franchise's greatest sin. Not the bad adaptations. Not turning survival horror into a Matrix knockoff. Not killing beloved characters off screen. It's that they broke the most basic contract between a storyteller and an audience. The contract that says, if you invest your time and attention, the story will at least try to make sense. The Resident Evil films didn't try. They just kept resetting, kept retconning, kept promising things they had 0 intention of delivering. And when the dust settled, they left behind 6 films, $1 billion, and a fan base that learned the hard way that none of it ever meant anything. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.